The lesson for today's video is why you should not learn scientific glassblowing under any circumstances. And the reason is, well, if there's broken glassware in your chemistry department, your departmental chair might say, hey, can you fix this? I'm going to have several videos showing relatively simple glassware repairs, and they'll be using techniques that I've already shown, but just kind of put all this together. In all seriousness, having the ability to repair broken glassware is a very valuable skill for any chemist or anybody who is going to be working in a research lab. This is a volumetric pipette that it was broken at the top, and I'll show how I cut that off in a little bit. This was another volumetric pipette that was broken at the bottom. So basically I'm going to Frankenstein them together and make a functional volumetric pipette. Now, if you are at a graduate student, for example, at a chemistry department, you most likely have a scientific glassblower on staff. So you would give him or her the parts to put all this stuff together, and they would take it from there. If you don't have a scientific glassblower, or you have some type of repair that needs to be done immediately, let's say it's on the weekend, having these skills, again, is completely worth its weight in gold. When I was a graduate student, I made my own custom T-tube for a reaction, and it wasn't because we didn't have a glassblower, it's simply that the glassblower's time was occupied with other things. So if I would have asked our glassblower to do the work for me, it might have taken 2 or 3 weeks for him to get around to it. Whereas I got the part made in less than half an hour once I found the parts and got it done. So having the ability to construct or repair glassware, again, very, very useful, but not taught anymore, or at least not for the majority of schools, for chemistry majors. And really, my video series is focused on chemistry majors, whether you're an undergraduate or graduate student. Having just a little bit of skill working with glass in the lab. It might not be something you think about today, but you never know, later in your career, you might realize, oh wow, I can fix that if I just had a torch. I'm going to use the diamond saw to cut the top off of the broken volumetric flask. Now I'm going to make another cut on this broken volumetric flask. Again, here the volumetric flask is broken in the body. There's nothing you can do with all these cracks. Even if you could seal them up and get it acceptable, you would have distorted the flask itself, and its graduation is meaningless at that point. So I'm going to cut it about here. I'm cutting probably a little bit more glass than I need, but I'd rather have more glass, and then I can trim it back if I need to a little bit later. I have the female joint connected to a male blank joint, which is connected to my blow hose. So I'll be blowing through the female joint, the neck that I'm going to be placing on there. One thing I should mention is that, I'll put the specifics, the outer diameter of the part that I'm putting onto the volumetric flask they're not the same. They're off by almost a millimeter, but it should be fine. To help me hold the volumetric flask, I've got this little clamp thingy. I'm sure it has a name. I'll put that in the description somewhere maybe. But the idea will be heat them up together, fuse them, and get them straight and uniform. So this is basically no different than just taking two pieces of tubing and making a straight seal or a butt seal. But because of how this volumetric flask is and just the length of this, it's a little more tricky in execution, but it is basically just fusing these two together to form a nice uniform straight seal. And because of the position of the camera, my hand will probably be blocking the camera view quite a bit as I go through here. So that's why I want to do this description before I do anything. My plan will be to get both ends nice and hot, fused, tack them together, and then work around the periphery and make it basically a nice uniform weld. But again, this is the kind of thing that in theory it should be very straightforward, but in execution, because of just how big that volumetric flask is, it's a little awkward. The other thing I could do is hold the volumetric flask in my hand and rotate it, which I've done that before, and that works too. In fact, if it slips out of the clamp, I might have to do that anyway. So don't think that the way I'm doing it is the only way to do it. Now, the ideal way to do this would be to put both of these pieces into a lathe and have your professional glassblower put them together seamlessly. That's not going to happen. I don't have a lathe, and I'm not a professional glassblower. So I'm just going to muddle through this as best I can. All right. And with this, I'm using a reasonable intense flame. In other words, I'm not making this like a jet engine, but I'm also not making it too wimpy, because I do need to be able to heat up the entire diameter of this tube, both pieces, to put them together. If I make the flame too small, I'm not going to be able to do it very efficiently, if at all, and I'll have issues with cracking. If I really crank up the intensity of the flame, that basically will magnify any mistakes I make. So it's the kind of thing that a professional glassblower would have a more intense flame at this point, but I'm going to go kind of error on the side of having the flame a little bit minimized, at least at first. And as far as the rotation of these, getting them synced up is kind of tricky, but I will do my best. All right. So I'm not done by any means, but I've decided, even though this started off absolutely horrible, to leave this in because I was able to recover it. Trying to use that clamp just basically didn't work very well. So at this point, I've got a reasonably good straight seal, but it's not straight or uniform. So what I'm going to do is spend a little bit of time just cleaning this up. And I'm just putting some heat in here just to make sure it doesn't crack. But the important thing is, if you noticed, as I started out, it went sideways on me. You can see this is not straight the way I want it to be, but that's okay. I'll be able to hopefully work that out. But despite the fact that I didn't get a good stick, I was able to recover and go from there. So this is the kind of thing that, again, you just have to accept that when you're starting out, it's not going to always go perfectly smooth, if you haven't practiced. And I haven't done any glass blowing in over a month now, but that's no excuse. And let me put my blow hose back in. And I'm going to pause again just to kind of give you an idea of what my thought process here is. I want to make sure I've got this sealed, that it's not going to crack on me, not going to break, and I think I'm there. Then I'm going to come back, heat it up a little bit more strongly overall, and then gently pull and adjust it to fix the uniformity. But I'm not too concerned about that. I do want to straighten it. That's actually more critical than anything else, so it doesn't have a weird balance as it sits. But this again is something that the amount of time you spend trying to make it more aesthetically pleasing, sometimes it's worth it. In this case, if it's not straight, it still will function, but it just, like I said, will look very weird. So I'm going to now go back and reheat the seams, or to make sure that I removed all the seams, and then worry about the thing overall. And whoops. I'm using the markings on the flask itself as a point of reference. So I've heated the front, I've heated the back, now I'm going to go to the sides. Take this off for a second. I'm going to heat the whole thing up now and worry about stretching it out, but what I was really trying to do here in those last sections is make sure that I've fused the entire tube all the way around the circumference together, so it flows together, so it's one piece of glass, not two pieces of glass, not a cold seal. And it's not perfectly uniform by any means. I can still see some defects, but at this stage, I'm going to try and heat the whole thing up, straighten it, and improve the uniformity if I can. And so at this point, I'm basically deciding I'm better off stopping at this point rather than doing more damage. So I didn't help myself at the very beginning because when I made the stick, it was off by just a little bit. Again, there are still plenty of imperfections as far as the uniformity of this, but from a purely practical aspect of this, the repair is done. If I try and correct this a little bit more the way I'm going, what I'm really worried about is that I'll twist the tubing. And once that happens, the game is over. It'll be a disaster, more so than it is now. Let me put this back here, see if that helps. But again, this is a case where the reason this volumetric flask is a volumetric flask is because of that score line where it's calibrated. The glass tubing on the top of it, if it's not uniform, it doesn't make any difference because you don't add liquid up to that. So again, not perfect, and once it cools down, I'll take some more detailed images and video of it. Obviously this needs to go into the annealing oven, but for all practical purposes, the repair is done. The only good news about making a kind of less than perfect repair like this is most likely this volumetric flask will be broken by one of our freshmen or even upperclassmen once it gets back into rotation. So never fall in love with your work when you're dealing with glassware because it doesn't last forever. Another thing, I mentioned this, but I figured I might as well show it now. So, looking at the non-uniformity of the part that I placed on here, so the neck for the flask is 15.7 millimeters, and the part that I added, its thickness is about 16.3, 16.4 millimeters, not including this big bulge up here. So going off of about here, it's like I said, about 16.3, 16.4. Trying to get it where it's not at the taper. So this non-uniformity, it represents both my bad glass blowing and the taper between the thicker and the thinner glass. Now, one thing I did want to come back and mention, why not, while I was heating it up, pull this a little bit more to stretch it out to make this taper seamless. In theory, that sounds like a great idea. In practice, if I were to pull, assuming my blow hose doesn't come off the top, there's a very good chance that I could twist it or some other way distort it. So I decided that rather than risk making a catastrophic mess, this little area of non-uniformity, I'm willing to live with it. Overall, I actually did take a Q-tip and go down into the inside of it, and everything was smooth. I didn't feel any irregularities or anything like that. So the weld is reasonably uniform, even though, like I said, at that area you get the bulge, and part of that bulge is because there is about a 1 millimeter difference So that's 16.3, 15.7. So not quite 1 millimeter, but there is a significant difference in the outer diameter of the two parts that I've fused together. Not quite a millimeter, but it is enough that if you subtracted half a millimeter from this area, this non-uniform area, then it would look much better. But again, this is a you don't want to wreck the entire piece trying to make some very small change. And again, if you look carefully at this, you can see, I think in one area, there, it's not quite I wouldn't call it an air bubble, but it's like a little occlusion right there. But again, it's not going to affect performance of this glassware, and it's better off, like I said, at this point, leaving it as it is. Again, if I had a setup with a glassblowing lathe where both pieces would be held together in high precision and rotated, then cleaning that up would be a snap. But again, doing it by hand, this is where once you've got that stick, which was bad, and then you repair it and you get it so it's sealed, then move on is my best advice.